Complete game coverage of the Cougars is right here on the KSL Sports Zone. It doesn't get much bigger than this. BYU and Texas Tech, your home for the best coverage of Cougar football, is right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. You're listening to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Join Hans and Scotty next Tuesday from noon to 3 at Sound Sleep Medical, 8941 South, 700 East in Sandy. We're going to talk a little bit Raider football with Don Williams, who covers the Raiders for the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal. We'll find out what he thinks about tomorrow night's big game, or tomorrow morning's big game.
Who do you think should feel good going into this game?
Oh, both teams, for sure.
You think one over the other?
No.
I think BYU should be feeling better about this game than Texas Tech. I think BYU is going to win this game. I think BYU should feel confident going into this game.
Well, yeah, they're 8-0. They should certainly have confidence, but there's reason for the Raiders to have confidence too.
Yeah, and Raiders have been really good, and you're at home, and that's all the excitement. You know, Utah felt better than Texas Tech probably going into that game as well, and Utah got crushed in the end, and Texas Tech escaped victorious. I get that Texas Tech is favored, but I don't know. If I'm BYU, I'm feeling pretty good about myself.
He covers the Red Raiders for the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal. He's Don Williams with us here on Jake and Ben. What's going on, Don?
Hey,
How are you?
Doing well, Jake and Ben. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well. We were just asking, who do you think should feel better going into this game? There's a bunch of momentum, obviously, for both of these teams, but how do you think Texas Tech is feeling about this game tomorrow morning?
I think Tech's feeling, confident. It's a team that really has a lot of experience, a lot of guys who are seniors and fifth-year seniors and whatnot. Of course, maybe kind of a key stat for Texas Tech this year is in those 8 wins, they've won all 8 games by at least 23 points. And so with the exception of, that game over at Arizona State, which ended with, just a fantastic drive by Sam Levitt and Jordan Tyson to score the winning touchdown in the final minute. With the exception of that game, Tech hasn't really faced a whole lot of adversity this year. And then, you kind of couple that with this is a campus and a town that's always been rabid whenever one of its teams is doing good. We've seen it obviously a lot in basketball the last several years. Haven't seen it as much in football. But when you give Texas Tech and Lubbock people a football team to root for, they go nuts. And so the atmosphere here this week, and I'm sure tomorrow as well, will be pretty intense. So for all those reasons, I think Tech feels really good about where it's sitting.
What kind of game do you think we're in for, Don? Is it going to be kind of a slugfest, low score, or are we going to see a shootout?
I would say slugfest, low score. Joey McGuire this week said that this will be the best game in college football this week, and he said it will be the most physical game in college football this week. Tech is just so completely different from the stereotypical Texas Tech team. The stereotypical Texas Tech team is one that lights up the scoreboard, airs it out, scores a ton of points, gives up a ton of points, and wins or loses 52-49. And they're just not playing those kind of games this year. This team is led by its defense, and I think on the flip side, I think just looking at it from an outsider's perspective, outsider's point of view, I think Texas Tech. I think the thing that really jumps out to them, and the thing that they talked about this week, is how big and physical BYU is. And I know, me personally, I think defensive front and those linebackers really get your attention. And I think it's kind of also reflected in the fact that both of these teams ranked so high nationally in the FBS in turnover margin. I believe last I looked, BYU's tied for 3rd this week in turnover margin, and Texas Tech tied for 13th in turnover margin. In Tech's case, that was the difference last week, was they had 5 takeaways at Kansas State. And the guy to keep an eye on there is, Jacob Rodriguez has 7 7 forced fumbles, which leads the nation. And this guy has this distinctive. I mean, he punches the football, kind of picks and chooses his spots, but he punches out the football. If you have a guy kind of contained and 2, 3, 4 people around him, and he's in pretty good position to make a tackle, then he'll take his chances and punch the ball, literally like a boxer. And it's come out a lot this year, and it's made a big difference. So, long story short, to answer your question, I think it's going to be more of a 24-21, 27-24 kind of game.
Will Hammond against Utah was the better quarterback. Where are Texas Tech fans on Baron Morton as the leading signal caller?
Coming out of the Utah game, there was a chorus of people who wanted Will to be the starting quarterback. And there was actually some of that last year because Will's a high-profile recruit. Top 50 in the state of Texas, which if you're top 50 in the state of Texas, that's something because there's a ton of high school talent, college talent playing in high school football here. So it's one of those situations where anytime the starting quarterback, when you have the young blue chip recruit, anytime the older starting quarterback throws 2 incomplete passes, it feels like get Will Hammond should be the guy in there. Get Morton out of there. Hammond needs to be in. There was some of that, but then Will, after the Utah game, didn't play. He was kind of slower starting when he came in against Kansas a couple of weeks later. And then this game at Arizona State was not that great until the very end when he led a couple of touchdown drives. And so the chorus for Will pretty much largely died down and subsided. And then, of course, it became a moot point when he just suffered a season-ending knee injury on October 25th against Oklahoma State, torn ACL. And so, bad thing for him is, even on a 9-month timeline, that only puts him back at the beginning of fall camp next year. So, there's some, I think, kind of consternation internally about what's he going to be like in September next year if he doesn't have anything in spring practice or even summer, kind of conditioning workouts.
Before the season, we all heard about the big money being pumped into Texas Tech's football program. And fast forward to this week, we had Cody Campbell, who's head of the Board of Regents there at Texas Tech, on with our morning show. And I got to tell you, I was extremely impressed with him and kind of his mission, I guess, for lack of a better word. So can you catch our listeners up on Cody, his story, and the impact that he's had on not only Texas Tech football, but college football?
Well, he's a guy who's from West Texas. He grew up in a couple hours north of Lubbock. He's a third-generation Texas Tech football player because his dad played for Texas Tech and his grandfather played for Texas Tech. I believe his granddad was like on maybe the earliest Texas Tech football team back in the 1920s. He was not a very highly recruited player, but he was part of Mike Leach's first recruiting class. Came in here in the year 2000, and kind of like he has been successful in business, kind of starting from scratch. He was successful as a college football player, coming in as a unheralded recruit, and then being a 3-year starter. And he was starting offensive guard on when Michael Leach's teams really started getting it going, which I would say was 2002 and 2003 and 2004. Cody was a starter on those teams that were just lighting it up in a fashion of kind of like a Lavelle Edwards BYU team. And I guess I take a little bit of pride in saying I remember Cody was just so smart and well-spoken back then. I remember thinking, this is a guy who could become this is a guy who kind of has a feel of a guy who could become very successful in business and become a donor to this program. I said that about him when he was 22 years old. And lo and behold, you kind of look at what's happened now. And of course, it's made a fortune in the oil and gas and land business, and then has been very because he played here, because the school means so much to him. he wanted to do everything he can to kind of pull Texas Tech football out of the doldrums that had been in for so long. And so, he has the means. And so he's, literally put his money where his mouth is. And he's also, because, again, of his the guy being really a sharp guy, he's the chairman of the Texas Tech Board of Regents at this moment. And so, and like you alluded to, he's even though he's obviously was a football player and his vested interest is really in football, he's kind of expanded that to have this feeling it's like it's really important, not just that, college football survives and prospers, but that the Olympic sports don't fall by the wayside at the same time. So that's kind of where his efforts are being directed outside of Texas Tech.
Do you expect this to be, I guess the first year in a long run of what this is going to look like for Texas Tech with him funding, the team and the transfer portal and kids coming in and out of high school? And do you think that's going to be, that they're going to be competitive, spending the most money amongst anyone in college football year after year?
I think they can be. And one thing I think to point out here is that Cody's not a one-man show in this, and he and his business partner John Sellers are not even a two-man show with it. There are, I would say, at least half a dozen guys or families who are also really strongly committed and big donors to this program. And so my answer to that would be, I think they will kind of spend at the top level as long as they're allowed to, as long as whatever the rules are that allow them to spend at a really high level. Because the team that they built this year, the House versus NCAA settlement terms went into effect on July the 1st. And after July the 1st, then, you went into kind of the salary cap, that $20.5 million that schools are allotted to spend. Well, Tech obviously was able to spend over and above that because most of these guys who, most of these big name transfers that they've gotten are guys whose deals were front loaded, and they got most of their money before July 1st. And so now, I guess it kind of remains to be seen what's the will schools be able to spend over and above that? What's this year's $20.5 million? I think next year will be like 22, something like that. Will schools still be able to spend over and above that amount? I think that's kind of what remains to be seen here.
Man, you mentioned Mike Leach and Lavelle Edwards before, and I used to work with Lavelle a little bit in his later years. He did some radio work for us, and to hear him first person tell the story of this annoying grad student that just kept hanging around his practices all the time, and then him eventually letting him stay and learn, and then obviously seeing where Mike Leach went with his career. I'd like to think both those guys are going to enjoy the game somewhere. Wherever they may be, they're going to enjoy it tomorrow.
Yeah, that's you very well put, exactly, because people talk about how Michael Leach kind of revolutionized offensive football, and as you just said, Mike learned so much of what so much of Mike's ideas kind of formulated there as a BYU student, where he watched. I'm 60 years old, so I remember vividly the BYU Lavelle Edwards teams of the 70s, and heck, I remember Gary Scheide's the first BYU quarterback I remember. So I'm very I think both of those guys obviously deserve the credit.
Legends, no doubt. Don, thank you for coming on with us. That was great. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the game tomorrow.
Yeah, enjoy the game.
All right, thanks, Jake. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Don. Don Williams, Lubbock Avalanche-Journal.
I'm always curious with donors, and as we had him on earlier this week, not us, but DJ and PK, and how he seems to be a positive. His name Cody Campbell. Cody Campbell. You got to be careful. Because there are going to be some donors that fancy themselves Jerry Jones.
Sure.
That want to make all the decisions and want immediate results and want to interfere if anything goes counter to what they expect.
Well, in this case, Chad Campbell bought him lines, which is exactly what they needed.
Cody.
Or what did I say, Chad?
Chad.
Cody Campbell
Yeah.
bought him offensive and defensive lines, which was pretty smart.
So we will. I'll be curious to see how that continues to go, especially if Texas Tech doesn't finish the season the way I guess you would hope, because there's still a chance that they finish the season with three losses, and that's a lot of money to spend on a 3-loss team that doesn't make the playoff.
All right, stay tuned. We wrap it up. Coming up next, Jake and Ben, 97.5 the KSL Sports Zone.